The late afternoon sun, precisely at 3:15 p.m., sliced across Oak Ridge Hills. Its light, usually warm, felt accusatory today, etching long, judgmental shadows from the precisely trimmed hedges and the unnervingly uniform facades. This was a realm of tranquil suburban order, or at least the appearance of it. Lawns were manicured to a mandated quarter-inch. Miniature green carpets rolled out before houses that stood like soldiers in beige formation. Mailboxes awaited the day's offerings at perfect, unwavering attention. And the Homeowners Association bylaws, thick as a phone book and twice as unforgiving, were wielded not as guidelines, but as scripture. Here, in this meticulously curated diorama of upper-middle-class aspiration, appearances were the currency of belonging. They mattered profoundly, deeply, terrifyingly. Behind the pristine, ever so slightly parted vertical blinds of her monument to beige conformity, one of the larger, newer homes commanding a prime view, Judith Blackwell watched. For the past 20 minutes, her vigil had been unbroken. Her eyes, narrowed into slits of cold disdain, were fixed 2 streets over, fixed on the modest, older ranch house nestled near the less ostentatious edge of the development, fixed on Sergeant Major Daniel Ramirez, Point Use Army retired. He was tending his roses, each deliberate snip of his well-oiled shears separating a spent bloom, each careful adjustment of a green twine support around a burgeoning stem, radiated a quiet competence that grated on Judith's nerves like fingernails on slate. His movements were economical, precise, imbued with a lifetime of discipline. He didn't hurry, he didn't waste motion. He simply was, present, calm, unflappable. A thin, bloodless line formed where Judith's lips pressed together, a familiar compression signaling internal rage. Daniel Ramirez, the quiet man, the decorated veteran neighbors spoke of with a casual, unearned respect that Judith, despite her wealth and carefully cultivated influence, could never seem to fully command. He kept to himself, mostly, content in the peace he felt he had earned after 30 years of service. His life was a quiet study in understated honor, a concept Judith found both baffling and intensely irritating. He didn't engage in the neighborhood's intricate political theater, didn't jockey for position on the HOA board, didn't seem remotely impressed by her carefully orchestrated displays of status. He simply existed, tending his award-winning roses, taking his solitary early morning walks, a figure of quiet dignity that disrupted the seamless, affluent narrative she was determined to impose upon Oak Ridge Hills. He didn't fit. His older house, though impeccably maintained, lacked the requisite square footage, the fashionable and HOA-approved stone accents. His unassuming presence was a discordant note in the symphony of striving she conducted. He was, in her meticulously ordered world, a weed, a stubborn, resilient weed in her otherwise perfect garden portfolio, and weeds, Judith Blackwell believed with unwavering conviction, needed to be eradicated. Permanently. Her gaze sharpened, malice glittering in her eyes like chips of obsidian. The countdown had begun long ago, ticking away in the back of her mind, with every polite nod he offered, every prize ribbon his roses won at the county fair. But now, the timer was accelerating. Daniel Ramirez lived a life ordered by routine and quiet contentment. Since Martha passed, the silence in the ranch house could sometimes feel heavy, but his days were structured. Early walks as dawn painted the sky, tending the roses that had been his wife's passion before they became his. Afternoons reading history, evenings listening to classical music. His daughter, Elena, called regularly, her voice a blend of warmth and professional crispness. Elena Ramirez carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, or at least, the weight of the region's federal law enforcement, as special agent in charge of the FBI field office. Her days were consumed by threats far larger than rogue dandelions or non-compliant trim colors, organized crime syndicates, domestic terrorism cells, complex cyber intrusions. These were the landscapes she navigated, a world starkly removed from the manicured anxieties of Oak Ridge Hills. She worried about her father, his stoic independence, a shield she sometimes feared might hide loneliness or vulnerability. But the tight-knit community, despite its tensions, offered a semblance of a safety net, and her father, Sergeant Major Ramirez, was nothing if not resilient, or so she believed. The tension in Oak Ridge Hills, the friction that occasionally disturbed the placid surface, almost invariably emanated from one source, Judith Blackwell. Judith didn't just live in Oak Ridge Hills, she sought to own it, spiritually if not legally. She held significant sway over the HOA board, a position secured through a potent cocktail of inherited wealth. Relentless networking at community potlucks, where she mostly criticized the food, and an unshakable, terrifying belief in her own inherent superiority. To Judith, the neighborhood wasn't a community of people, it was an asset, and an investment portfolio demanding constant, vigilant management to maximize its perceived value. Anything that threatened this value, a patch of slightly browning lawn, a child's bicycle left momentarily unattended on a driveway, a resident deemed aesthetically or socially out of place, became not just a violation of the bylaws, but a personal affront to her vision. And Daniel Ramirez, somehow, seemed to embody everything that irritated her, his quiet refusal to be drawn into her orbit of influence, the effortless respect he commanded, a quiet deference from neighbors that Judith craved but could only achieve through intimidation, his modest, older home, a constant reminder that Oak Ridge Hills wasn't yet the exclusive, homogeneous enclave she envisioned. Perhaps it was simply that his quiet honor felt like a rebuke to her own carefully constructed, brittle facade. Whatever the specific catalyst, Judith had set her sights on him. Her campaign began subtly, insidiously, deploying the HOA bylaws as her initial weaponry. Her first salvos were exercises in petty tyranny, delivered via coldly formal notices slipped into his mailbox. A citation demanding he repaint his window trim. The color, a muted forest green, hadn't changed in 15 years and perfectly matched the original architectural specifications. Judith claimed, without evidence, that it had faded unevenly, presenting an inconsistent visual aspect from the street. A stern warning about a single, cheerful dandelion that dared to push its yellow head through a crack in his walkway. The notice cited Section 12, Subsection F, Prohibition of Noxious Weeds, classifying the lone flower with the alarming gravity usually reserved for invasive species. A complaint, bordering on the surreal, regarding the precise timing of his recycling bin retrieval. She alleged, citing no witnesses but her own, apparently infallible observation, that the bin remained visible at the curb for a full 7 minutes past the mandated post-collection window. It constituted, the notice declared, a temporary but unacceptable blight upon the community streetscape. Daniel, a man conditioned by decades of military life to respect rules and procedures, however nonsensical, met each petty assault with quiet, methodical compliance. He purchased a small can of the exact same trim paint and meticulously touched up the minuscule area Judith had likely identified using binoculars. He plucked the offending dandelion with the precision of a surgeon, ensuring not a shred of root remained. He began retrieving his recycling bin the very instant the truck's hydraulic arm released it, sometimes nearly colliding with the sanitation worker in his promptness. Neighbors often offered quiet support, rolling their eyes in solidarity. Martha Jenkins from across the street, a retired librarian with a sharp wit, frequently intercepted him during these corrective actions. Judith's on the warpath again. Dan, she'd ask, handing him a rag or offering a commiserating sigh. Honestly, that woman needs a more fulfilling hobby. Stamp collecting, perhaps. Or maybe competitive frowning. Daniel would just offer a small, weary smile and thank her. He wouldn't gossip, wouldn't feed the negativity. He simply complied. But his calm, thorough adherence wasn't the reaction Judith craved. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the flustered capitulation she elicited from others. It was resilience, quiet, dignified resistance masked as compliance. His refusal to be ruffled, his meticulous adherence turning her own rules back on her, only fueled the furnace of her animosity. He wasn't buckling. He wasn't intimidated. He was, in his infuriatingly quiet way, winning. This passive defiance could not stand. Compliance clearly wasn't enough to satisfy her need for control, her desire to see him diminished. Escalation was required, a more permanent solution, a way to remove this perceived blight, this symbol of quiet defiance, from her perfect neighborhood altogether. The weed needed poison, not just pruning. Judith Blackwell wasn't merely a neighborhood bully armed with a rulebook. Beneath the expensive cardigans and the veneer of civic concern lurked a sharp, analytical intelligence utterly unburdened by empathy or scruples. If the existing HOA covenants, even stretched to their most punitive interpretations, couldn't be weaponized effectively enough to drive Daniel Ramirez out, she would simply invent new, far more devastating ammunition. Her evenings transformed. The hours previously dedicated to scanning luxury real estate listings, drafting scathing critiques of neighbors' landscaping choices for HOA notices, or planning exclusionary social events shifted to a darker pursuit. She retreated to her pristine home office. The glow of her oversized monitor reflecting in her cold eyes as she plunged into the murky depths of the internet. She bypassed the curated gardens of mainstream search engines, venturing into the shadowy alleys of the dark web, exploring forums and clandestine marketplaces where illicit services were traded like stocks. Reputation destruction packages, deep fake generation software, tutorials on creating convincing, utterly fraudulent digital footprints. She learned about the vulnerabilities in commercial background check systems, how easily aggregated data could be poisoned, how digital identities could be cloned and manipulated. She researched techniques for document forgery, studying the nuances of official seals, typography, and bureaucratic language. The plan began to coalesce in her mind, chilling in its calculated cruelty, breathtaking in its audacity. She wouldn't just paint Daniel Ramirez as a negligent homeowner or a community nuisance. No, that was amateur hour. That left room for doubt, for defense, for neighborly support. She needed something absolute, something that would trigger immediate revulsion, bypass rational thought, and activate the deepest fears of the community. She would brand him a criminal, a dangerous one, a hidden predator lurking behind the facade of quiet dignity and prize-winning roses. Working with the meticulous, sociopathic precision of a watchmaker assembling a bomb, she began to construct a phantom criminal past for Daniel Ramirez. She might have used sophisticated document manipulation software, purchased anonymously using cryptocurrency laundered through multiple tumblers, or perhaps she outsourced the most sensitive parts to faceless freelancers met in encrypted chat rooms, providing them with carefully curated and misleading details about her target. She didn't invent a simple bar fight or a youthful indiscretion. That lacked the necessary shock value. It had to be something visceral, something that resonated with primal anxieties and, crucially, something that directly invoked the stringent resident safety covenants she had personally championed and railroaded through the HOA board years prior. Clauses granting the board sweeping, almost unchecked power to demand the removal of any resident deemed a threat, particularly towards children. Clauses written, perhaps subconsciously, for just such a future weaponization. She fabricated court documents, not just one, but a small, curated dossier designed to suggest a disturbing, albeit hidden, pattern of behavior, perhaps an older, allegedly sealed charge of aggravated assault, complete with fabricated police report summaries hinting at explosive, uncontrolled violence. Something to plant the seed of doubt about his calm demeanor. But the centerpiece, the truly insidious element, was a more recent, carefully dated but entirely fictitious charge. Something involving indecency or behavior potentially endangering a minor. Vague enough to be difficult to disprove immediately. Specific enough to ignite panic and disgust. These counterfeit documents were masterpieces of deception, designed to fool anyone short of a federal investigator with access to primary, sealed law enforcement databases. She obtained high-resolution scans of legitimate court filings from public county records, easily accessible online. From these, she carefully lifted authentic-looking judicial signatures using image editing software. Official seals were replicated with astonishing accuracy, perhaps using custom-made digital stamps or templates acquired online. Case numbers were generated using algorithms that mimicked real court docketing systems in their structure and sequence. The formatting, the specific fonts favored by the local courts, the dense, often impenetrable legal jargon, all were meticulously replicated. She even included fabricated motion papers and brief disposition reports, sketching a thin but terrifyingly plausible narrative of hidden criminality. She printed the finished fabrications on high-quality, heavy paper stock, the kind used for official certificates, lending them a physical weight and texture that enhanced their perceived authenticity. It was a sociopathic work of art, born of malice and executed with chilling precision. Armed with her poisonous creations, nestled securely within an expensive leather portfolio, Judith Blackwell requested an emergency, closed-door session of the Oak Ridge Hills HOA board. She kept the reason deliberately vague, a grave security matter requiring immediate board attention, ensuring maximum attendance, and fostering an atmosphere of anxious anticipation. The 5 board members gathered in the small, windowless meeting room of the community clubhouse. The air, usually smelling faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant, felt thick with unusual tension. Frank Peterson, the retired accountant, fidgeted with his pen. Helen Gable, whose grandchildren often played in the community park, looked apprehensive. Mark Chen, the youngest and newest member, glanced nervously between Judith's empty chair and the door. Judith made her entrance precisely 3 minutes late, a calculated move to heighten the drama. Her face was a carefully constructed mask of distress. Her usual crisp Chanel power suit seemed intentionally, subtly askew. She clutched the leather portfolio to her chest, and her free hand trembled, a performance detail practiced meticulously in front of her bathroom mirror. "Board members," she began, her voice pitched low, husky with manufactured emotion. She scanned their faces, making eye contact with each one. I hardly know how to begin. This is deeply, profoundly disturbing." She paused, letting the silence stretch, allowing their anxiety to build. "As part of my ongoing due diligence," she continued, choosing her words carefully, reviewing our association's insurance policies. Specifically, the liability coverage related to resident conduct. I was cross-referencing some publicly available databases. It was quite by accident, I assure you. Another pause. She took a shaky breath, and I stumbled upon something. Something horrifying. Something that affects the safety and security of every single resident in Oak Ridge Hills. With deliberate slowness, she opened the portfolio. She extracted 5 identical sets of the fabricated documents. Her hand, she noted with satisfaction, still maintained that slight, convincing tremor as she slid a copy across the polished table to each board member. This concerns Mr. Daniel Ramirez. A collective intake of breath. Eyes widened. Frank Peterson picked up the top sheet, his brow furrowing instantly. "What in God's name is this, Judith?" he asked, his voice tight with disbelief. "Court records for Dan Ramirez." "I wish it weren't true, Frank," Judith replied, her voice cracking slightly. She produced a silk handkerchief from her sleeve and dabbed delicately at the corner of a perfectly dry eye. "Believe me, I was shocked, devastated. Aggravated assault, from years back, apparently sealed, which explains why it never surfaced before. But more recently," she leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "More recently, charges related to, well, behavior deemed potentially endangering to minors. It's all there. The case numbers, the findings." She pointed a perfectly manicured, trembling finger at a particularly damning paragraph on Frank's copy. "Living right here," she whispered, letting the horror sink in. "Near our children, near your grandchildren, Helen." Helen Gable gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She snatched up her copy, her eyes scanning the fabricated charges, her face paling visibly. Frank Peterson kept staring at the papers, shaking his head slowly. "Judith, are you absolutely sure this is genuine? Daniel Ramirez? It seems impossible. The man's a decorated war hero." "Quiet as a mouse, Frank, please," Judith retorted, injecting a note of wounded indignation into her voice. "Look at the documents, the official seals, the judge's signature copied directly from public records. Do you honestly think I wanted to uncover this? That I enjoy bringing this nightmare to light?" She leaned back, regaining a semblance of composure. "I was simply verifying information related to our insurance requirements. You can, of course, attempt to request the official files directly from the county courthouse if you harbor doubts." She delivered this line with an air of weary reasonableness. Though accessing sealed records, especially those involving minors, can be a complex and lengthy process for civilians, as I understand it, she knew, with chilling certainty, that a casual inquiry would hit a dead end. The counterfeit case numbers wouldn't match anything real, and the bureaucratic hurdles, coupled with the sheer horror of the alleged charges, would likely deter any immediate, deep verification. She was banking on fear, plausible deniability, and procedural inertia. Mark Chen, the younger board member, looked physically ill. His face was ashen. I don't know what to think," he stammered, looking from the documents to Judith and back again. If this is true, our bylaws are crystal clear. Section 7. Subsection C, the Resident Safety Covenant, the one you pushed for. Judith." He swallowed hard. "Felony convictions, especially offenses deemed to pose a potential risk to minors. It mandates action." "Precisely, Mark," Judith pressed, sensing the tide turning irrevocably in her favor. She straightened, her voice regaining some of its usual commanding tone. though still laced with feigned gravity. Our duty is not just clear, it is absolute. We cannot, in good conscience, ignore this. Think of the potential liability to the association if something were to happen. Think of the catastrophic impact on our property values if this information were to become public knowledge. She scanned their faces again, her gaze lingering on Helen Gable's terrified expression. We have a fiduciary responsibility. More than that, we have a moral responsibility to act decisively, immediately, for the safety of our families, for the security of our homes. Frank Peterson made one last attempt at reason, though his voice lacked conviction. But eviction, based solely on these documents. Shouldn't we at least talk to him first? Hear his side of the story, give him a chance to explain. Judith's eyes flashed, a flicker of her true steel showing through the cracks in her performance. Explain what, Frank? She snapped, her voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the fearful silence. Explain away official court records. Allow a potential predator, a man with a documented history of violence and endangerment, even one more day in our midst, while we talk. She scoffed dismissively. The risk is far too great, unacceptable. The bylaws, our bylaws, demand immediate action to terminate residency. There is no room for sentimentality when the safety of children is potentially at stake. She stared down each board member, her gaze unwavering, radiating absolute certainty and an unspoken threat. Oppose me on this, and you oppose the safety of this community. You risk everything. The air in the small room grew heavy, suffocating with fear. Fear of the monstrous allegations contained in the terrifyingly real-looking documents. Fear of lawsuits and plummeting property values. Fear of negligence. And perhaps, lurking beneath it all, fear of Judith Blackwell herself, of incurring her formidable wrath. Tentative defenses, born of neighborly acquaintance and basic decency, withered under the heat of Judith's manufactured crisis and the cold weight of the counterfeit papers. Doubt gnawed at them. What if it was true? How could they live with themselves if they ignored it and something happened? Reluctantly, overshadowed by Judith's relentless pressure and the specter of unimaginable consequences. The board voted. 4 hands went up in favor of initiating immediate eviction proceedings against Daniel Ramirez, citing violation of HOA safety covenants based on the presented criminal history. Only Frank Peterson abstained, his face etched with profound doubt and a sickening sense of dismay. He couldn't bring himself to vote yes, but he lacked the courage, or perhaps the certainty, to vote no against the tide of fear Judith had unleashed. The motion passed. Judith allowed herself the smallest, almost imperceptible flicker of grim satisfaction. It curled the corner of her lip for a microsecond before being smoothed away into her mask of grave concern. Phase 1 complete. The weed was being ripped out by the roots. The neighborhood would be purified. Her vision would prevail. The official notice arrived 3 days later, certified mail, requiring a signature. Daniel was meticulously pruning a Cecile Brunner rosebush near his front porch, coaxing its delicate pink blooms, when the familiar mail carrier approached, holding out the stiff, legal-sized envelope and a digital signature pad. He signed absently, his mind on the precise angle of his cut, thanking the carrier with a quiet nod. He set the envelope aside on the small, weathered wrought iron table on his porch. Intending to open it later, he finished his task, carefully collecting the clippings, admiring the simple beauty of the flowers that always reminded him of Martha. Later, settled in his favorite worn armchair in the living room, a steaming cup of black coffee beside him, the quiet strains of a Bach cello suite filling the air. He finally picked up the envelope. He slid it open with his thumb, expecting another trivial HOA reminder about lawn edging or trash can placement. The words leaped off the page, assaulting his eyes, his mind, his very sense of reality. Oak Ridge Hills, Homeowners Association official notice of bylaw violation and demand to vacate property pursuant to Oak Ridge Hills covenants. Conditions and restrictions, CC and R Section 7. Subsection C Resident Safety Standards. Following the discovery of felony criminal history associated with resident Daniel Ramirez, including charges indicating potential risk to community safety and well-being, specifically, records pertaining to aggravated assault case file #redacted, and subsequent charges related to endangering minors case file #redacted. You are hereby notified that your residency constitutes a violation of said covenants. Therefore, you are required to vacate the premises located at Daniel's address within 30 calendar days of the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in legal action. He dropped the letter as if it were coated in acid. It fluttered to the worn carpet at his feet. His breath hitched in his chest. A roaring sound filled his ears. Criminal history, aggravated assault, endangering minors. The phrases screamed at him from the page. Nonsensical, grotesque, utterly alien. He bent down slowly, his hand trembling, and picked up the notice. He read it again, his eyes scanning the official letterhead, the dense legalistic text, the unbelievable accusations. Then a third time, a cold dread, unlike anything he had ever experienced, not in basic training, not in combat zones, not even during the long, agonizing months of Martha's illness, washed over him. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Decades of service to his country, a life lived by a strict code of honor, integrity, and discipline, a reputation carefully guarded, not out of vanity, but out of a deep-seated belief in duty and responsibility, all seemingly obliterated by lines of text on a piece of paper, referencing crimes he had never committed, events that had never happened. He felt dizzy, disoriented, as if the solid ground beneath his feet had suddenly turned to quicksand. The quiet, ordered sanctuary of his home felt violated, contaminated. He stumbled towards the kitchen phone, his mind racing, trying to grasp the enormity of the accusation. He had to clear this up. It had to be a mistake, a terrible, bureaucratic error. He dialed the number for the HOA management company listed on the notice. His voice, when he finally spoke to the receptionist, was tight, strained. "My name is Daniel Ramirez. I received a notice, an eviction notice. It claims I have a criminal record. This is impossible. There must be a mistake." The response was chillingly polite, utterly devoid of human warmth. A bureaucratic wall, smooth and impenetrable. "Mr. Ramirez, thank you for calling. Regarding the notice you received, all communication pertaining to this matter must be directed, in writing, to the association's legal counsel. Their contact information is provided in the notice." Click. The line went dead. Legal counsel. Writing. He felt a surge of helpless frustration. He needed to talk to someone now. Explain. Prove his innocence. He tried calling Frank Peterson, the board member who had always seemed the most reasonable, the least under Judith Blackwell's spell. Frank answered, his voice hesitant, laced with audible discomfort. "Dan." "Oh, Lord. You got the notice then." "Frank, what is going on?" Daniel pleaded, gripping the phone tightly. "This is insane." "Criminal record. Where did this come from?" Frank sighed heavily. "Dan, I'm so sorry." It was Judith. She came to an emergency meeting. She had documents. Dan, court documents. They looked, damn it, they looked official. Seals, signatures. The whole 9 yards. He paused. She claimed they showed. Well, what the notice says. She pushed hard, played on everyone's fears. The board voted. I abstained. Dan. I swear I did, but the motion passed. Helplessness washed over Daniel again, colder and more profound this time. Documents. Forged documents. It had to be Judith. The petty harassment hadn't been enough. She had escalated to this. Character assassination. An attempt to utterly destroy him. He felt trapped in a surreal, Kafkaesque nightmare, accused of monstrous acts based on lies, judged and condemned by people who saw only terrifying pieces of paper, unable to confront his accuser or plead his case. He was a soldier, trained to face tangible enemies, to fight battles with clear objectives. But this was an invisible assault, a poisoning of his reputation, a theft of his peace, his home, his very identity. It left him bewildered, heartbroken, and terrifyingly alone. News, even carefully managed news, travels fast in a neighborhood like Oak Ridge Hills. Whispers turn to hushed conversations over fences, then to open speculation. Did you hear about Daniel Ramirez? Evicted. Why? Something about a criminal past. Involving kids. No, not Daniel. Impossible. Initial reactions were largely disbelief and outrage, especially among those who knew Daniel best. Martha Jenkins was incandescent with fury, marching over immediately. This has Judith Blackwell's venomous fingerprints all over it. Dan, she declared, her voice trembling with anger. It's monstrous. We won't stand for it. Flyers defending Daniel's character, Support Sergeant Major Ramirez, a man of honor, appeared taped to lampposts and community bulletin boards, printed by anonymous supporters. They were promptly torn down by the HOA's grounds crew, citing regulations against unauthorized postings. Neighbors confronted board members, demanding answers, explanations. They were met with nervous evasions, fearful glances, and repeated references to confidential board matters and legal counsel. But Judith Blackwell, anticipating the backlash, launched a swift and ruthless counter-offensive. Carefully redacted copies of the fabricated court documents began circulating, delivered anonymously in mailboxes, perhaps, or strategically leaked online in neighborhood forums. Enough detail was obscured to potentially sidestep immediate claims of libel, just sharing publicly available information. But the damning nature of the alleged charges, assault, endangering minors, was left starkly clear. Judith herself adopted a posture of sorrowful duty, repeating her mantra in emails and carefully orchestrated sidewalk conversations. Such a tragedy, heartbreaking discovery. But community safety must come first. We have to follow the bylaws, protect the children. Liability. The official-looking nature of the counterfeit papers, combined with the HOA's official, unyielding stance and Judith's relentless fear-mongering, began to sow confusion and doubt, even among Daniel's staunchest supporters. The documents looked so real. The charges were so horrific. Could they possibly have been wrong about quiet, dignified Daniel all along? Was there a hidden darkness they had never seen? The doubt was a corrosive acid, eating away at the foundations of community trust, isolating Daniel further. For 3 days and 3 nights, Daniel Ramirez barely slept. He paced the confines of his small house like a caged animal. The eviction notice, a malevolent presence lying accusingly on his kitchen table. The 30-day deadline loomed, ticking down like a clock above a guillotine. Each tick echoed the shattering of his peace, the crumbling of his world. He felt utterly adrift, overwhelmed by the Byzantine legal threats, the public humiliation, the sheer, inexplicable malice of the attack, the meticulous order of his life, had devolved into terrifying chaos, orchestrated by an unseen, venomous hand. Finally, on the fourth day, sleep-deprived, despairing, and feeling the crushing weight of isolation, he broke the habit of a lifetime, the stoic self-reliance, the ingrained military discipline to handle his own battles. Crumbled. He needed help. He couldn't fight this phantom enemy alone. He picked up the phone, his hand unsteady, and dialed the number he knew by heart. It had been, he realized with a sickening jolt, nearly 75 hours since Judith Blackwell had presented her poisonous fabrications to the HOA board. 75 hours this lie had been allowed to fester, to spread, to take root. "Elena," he began, his voice rough, strained, almost unrecognizable to his own ears. He had to clear his throat before he could continue. "Maja, I need your help. Something terrible is happening here." Special Agent in charge Elena Ramirez was deep in a classified briefing on a complex interstate fraud ring when her secure desk phone chimed with her father's private number. An anomaly. He rarely, if ever, called her during core work hours unless it was urgent. A prickle of unease went through her. "Papa," she answered immediately, stepping away from the briefing table. "Is everything okay?" She listened, her body going rigid, the blood draining from her face as Daniel's halting, bewildered voice recounted the impossible narrative: the HOA, Judith Blackwell's escalating harassment, the sudden emergency meeting, the eviction notice, the unbelievable, grotesque accusations, aggravated assault, endangering minors, her father, Sergeant Major Daniel Ramirez, the most honorable, upright man she had ever known, a man whose integrity was the bedrock upon which she had built her own life, her own career in law enforcement, accused of heinous crimes, being thrown out of his home based on lies. A chill colder than any fear she'd felt facing down armed criminals snaked down her spine. It was followed immediately by a surge of pure, incandescent fury, hot, protective, and utterly focused. This wasn't just a personal attack, a monstrous injustice against her family. This was a sophisticated criminal operation. The details screamed it: fabricated court documents, exploitation of HOA rules, targeting a vulnerable senior, aggravated identity theft, forgery of government instruments, wire fraud, mail fraud. Her protective instincts as a daughter raged, demanding immediate, overwhelming retribution. Her professional training kicked in simultaneously, imposing order on the chaos of her emotions. "Papa, listen to me. Listen very carefully," she said, her voice regaining its trained, professional calm, betraying none of the tempest raging inside her, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Stop. Just stop worrying for 1 second and hear me. Those records are fake, 100% fraudulent, utterly bogus." She spoke with absolute conviction. Someone manufactured them specifically to target you, to drive you out. She didn't need to guess who. Judith Blackwell's name hung unspoken in the air between them. Do not talk to the HOA board anymore. Do not talk to their management company. And absolutely do not speak to their lawyers. Not one single word. Her tone was sharp, commanding. Don't sign anything they send you. Don't return their calls. Don't respond to any emails or letters. Complete radio silence. Do you understand me? "Papa." "Fake." Daniel's voice on the other end held a fragile thread of desperate hope. It broke her heart. "But Elena, they looked so real. Official seals, case numbers, judicial signatures. They're designed to look real, Papa," Elena explained patiently, though her mind was already racing ahead, calculating, planning. That's the point. It's a common tactic in sophisticated deception schemes. It's also a serious federal crime. She took a deep, steadying breath. I will handle this. From here on out, I take over. She paused, softening her tone slightly. Papa, don't worry, I'll handle everything. You know my job. You know what I do. Just stay put. Try to distract yourself. Read a book. Work in the garden. Don't engage with anyone about this. And trust me. A long pause. Then Daniel's voice, infused with newfound strength. Perhaps just the relief of unburdening himself. Maija, he said simply, the familiar term of endearment grounding her. You're a special agent in charge. You know what to do. I trust you. Good. I need to make some calls right now. Papa. Important ones. I'll be in touch soon. Ending the call, Elena stood motionless for a long moment, staring unseeingly at the secure, panoramic view of the city skyline from her office window. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting imperatives. The daughter in her wanted to storm Oak Ridge Hills herself, kick down Judith Blackwell's door, and personally slap handcuffs on the woman who had dared to attack her father, unleash the full, terrifying power of her office, burn it all down. The special agent in charge knew, with clarity, that such a course was impossible, unthinkable. The conflict of interest was a chasm wide and deep. Her personal involvement would irrevocably taint any investigation, compromise any subsequent prosecution, potentially even allow the perpetrator to escape justice on a technicality. Integrity, the very principle her father embodied, the principle she had sworn to uphold, demanded she step aside, completely. Her next calls were internal, swift, and precise, adhering strictly to FBI protocols, governing sensitive matters and potential conflicts of interest. She contacted her direct superior, the assistant director in charge ADIC for the entire region, laying out the situation concisely. Clinically, decorated veteran father targeted by malicious actor within HOA. Evidence of sophisticated document forgery, potentially constituting multiple federal felonies, including aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, potential computer fraud. She formally requested the immediate initiation of a federal investigation. And then, the hardest part, she formally recused herself from any command, oversight, information flow, or operational decisions related to the case. Effective immediately. The ADIC, a grizzled veteran of the Bureau who had seen nearly everything, listened intently. He understood immediately the gravity of the alleged crimes: attacking a veteran, weaponizing identity theft, corrupting community trust, and the absolute necessity of maintaining procedural purity given the SAC's personal connection. Understood. Elena, he said without hesitation, his voice firm. Full recusal noted and accepted. This sounds egregious, vile, frankly. We'll handle it. Top priority assignment. We will assemble a dedicated task force immediately, completely firewalled from your chain of command. We'll ensure total impartiality. He paused. Your father deserves justice. We'll see that he gets it. Thank you, sir, Elena managed, the professional mask firmly in place, though relief warred with the frustration of being sidelined. Within hours, the wheels of federal justice began to turn, grinding slowly but with immense power. A dedicated task force was assembled, hand-picked by the ADIC experienced agents, specialists, drawn from the field office's elite white-collar crime squad, the technically adept cybercrime division, and, pending further investigation into the HOA board's potential complicity or willful blindness, the public corruption unit, The case file, designated high-priority sensitive SAC recusal, landed on the desk of a seasoned supervisory special agent who reported directly to the ADIC, bypassing Elena's entire command structure. The firewall was absolute. Elena Ramirez, SAC, would receive no updates, have no input, and exercise no influence over the investigation into the crimes committed against Daniel Ramirez, her father. She could only wait and trust the system she served. The FBI task force moved with the deliberate speed and surgical precision characteristic of complex federal investigations. They operated under the radar initially, gathering evidence quietly but relentlessly. Their first action was swift, definitive, and executed within hours of the case assignment, running Sergeant Major Daniel Ramirez's full identifiers, name, DOB-SSN, through the sealed, authoritative National Crime Information Center, NCIC database. The system, the bedrock of U.S. law enforcement data, cross-references federal.state and local criminal records repositories nationwide. The result flashed back instantly, confirming what Elena knew with unshakable certainty. NCIC response. No record found Daniel Ramirez possessed a completely clean history, not a single charge, let alone a felony conviction. The documents Judith Blackwell had presented to the HOA board, the foundation upon which she had built her case for eviction, were officially confirmed as elaborate, malicious fabrications, counterfeit government instruments. With the core accusation demonstrably false, the investigation pivoted like a predator turning on its prey. The focus shifted entirely to the origin, creation, and dissemination of the counterfeit documents. The objective: unmask the architect of the fraudulent scheme. Cybercrime agents, working from secure labs, began a deep forensic analysis of the digital copies of the bogus court records that Judith had strategically, if anonymously, circulated. Even redacted files contain hidden data. They meticulously dissected metadata, searching for timestamps, author information, software signatures, printer drivers, any digital fingerprint that could betray the creator's tools or location. Simultaneously, financial forensic investigators moved with quiet authority, armed with federal grand jury subpoenas. They began peeling back the layers of Judith Blackwell's financial life. Bank accounts, credit card statements, online payment platforms like PayPal and Venmo, cryptocurrency exchange records, cloud storage accounts, Dropbox, Google Drive, iCloud. They weren't just looking for large, obvious payments. They were hunting for subtle clues, small, recurring subscriptions to obscure software companies known for document manipulation tools, payments, perhaps routed through shell corporations or third-party processors, to online entities, specializing in reputation management, often a euphemism for illicit services or document fabrication, purchases of high-quality paper stock or specialized printing equipment. Interviews commenced, starting with the HOA board members, conducted discreetly at first, away from prying neighborhood eyes. The interviews were nonetheless formal, conducted by pairs of task force agents. The tone was professional but firm. Obstruction of a federal investigation carries serious penalties. Faced with stern-faced FBI operatives asking pointed questions about the emergency meeting, the documents presented, and the pressure applied by Judith Blackwell, the board members' initial solidarity or fear-induced silence crumbled rapidly. Frank Peterson, the abstaining member, cooperated fully, his relief palpable. He provided a detailed, damning account of Judith's performance, her manipulative tactics, and the fear she had instilled. He turned over copies of all communications related to the matter. Other board members, realizing the potential legal jeopardy they faced, conspiracy, aiding and abetting, quickly sought to distance themselves from Judith. Their narratives painted her as the sole architect, the driving force, the one who presented the evidence and demanded action based on the bylaws she had implemented. Their fear of Judith was swiftly eclipsed by the far more potent fear of federal indictment. The digital breadcrumbs began to form a trail, leading directly, inexorably, back to Judith Blackwell's expensive beige fortress. IP addresses associated with her home network were flagged. Activity logs showed access, around the critical time frame, to websites known to host templates for counterfeit legal documents, forums discussing forgery techniques, and dark web marketplaces specializing in illicit digital services. The financial analysts struck gold. They uncovered cleverly disguised transactions, small payments initially missed, routed through obscure online payment processors. Payments linked to shell companies traced back to known providers of sophisticated document creation software, often used for illegal purposes. Further digging revealed larger, lump sum payments made via international wire transfer to an entity flagged in previous investigations for providing bespoke reputation warfare packages, including document fabrication. Then came the breakthrough from the cyber team, executing a search warrant on Judith's cloud storage accounts, obtained based on the mounting probable cause. Forensic specialists bypassed standard encryption. Deep within nested folders, hidden under innocuous file names, they found them, draft versions, earlier iterations of the fabricated court documents, files showing track changes, edits, experiments with different fonts and signature placements, digital sketches of the crime itself. Crucially, the metadata embedded within these draft files contained user information and timestamps that directly implicated Judith Blackwell's personal devices and accounts. It was the digital equivalent of finding the killer's fingerprints on the weapon. Furthermore, the cloud storage yielded another disturbing discovery. Preliminary analysis of recovered deleted files and search history suggested Judith might have researched, or even created, similar false documents targeting at least 2 other Oak Ridge Hills residents, individuals known to have clashed with her previously over HOA matters or perceived social slights. The scope of her criminal activity, her calculated malice, potentially extended beyond just Daniel Ramirez. She hadn't just targeted the veteran. She may have been building an arsenal of reputational destruction to deploy against anyone who defied her reign. The evidence was overwhelming. Digital, financial, testimonial, a tightening net of proof. The task. Force leader briefed the assistant U.S. attorney assigned to the case. Together, they presented the evidence to a federal grand jury. The grand jury, after reviewing the compelling evidence of a sophisticated, malicious criminal scheme targeting a vulnerable veteran, deliberated for less than an hour. They returned sealed indictments against Judith Blackwell, multiple felony counts, aggravated identity theft using Daniel Ramirez's identity in the commission of other felonies, wire fraud using electronic communications, internet.email, to execute the scheme, mail fraud using the USPOS TAL service to deliver the fraudulent eviction notice based on false pretenses, potential additional charges related to computer fraud, and possibly witness tampering given her pressure on the board. Armed with the sealed federal indictments and judicially authorized search and arrest warrants, based on overwhelming probable cause, the FBI task force prepared to act. The time for quiet investigation was over. The time for decisive action had arrived. Dawn was just beginning to break over Oak Ridge Hills, painting the manicured lawns and silent houses in pale, ethereal light. The usual tranquility, however, was about to be shattered. A convoy of dark, Unmarked FBI vehicles converged silently, professionally, on the street where Judith Blackwell's expensive home stood like a monument to beige arrogance. They moved without sirens, their approach swift and coordinated. Agents in tactical vests, clearly marked FBI in bold yellow letters, emerged quickly, establishing a secure perimeter around the property. Neighbors peering through curtains would see the unmistakable, intimidating presence of federal law enforcement descending upon their quiet enclave. A specialized entry team, trained for high-risk warrant executions, approached the imposing front door. The scene was devoid of unnecessary Hollywood drama, but charged with the quiet, intense seriousness of federal officers carrying out a lawful, potentially dangerous operation against a suspect known to be intelligent, resourceful, and potentially desperate. Given the high-profile nature of the impending arrest, targeting a wealthy, influential figure in a prominent community, involving sensational allegations, and the daughter of the local FBI director, the task force knew media attention was likely. Legally permissible channels, such as the public unsealing of court records, coinciding with the arrest or routine monitoring of official radio traffic by news outlets, meant that local news vans were already discreetly positioning themselves at the edge of the perimeter, cameras ready. The sharp, authoritative knock echoed in the pre-dawn stillness. Then, the amplified voice, clear and unwavering, cutting through the quiet air. FBI, we have a federal arrest warrant and a search warrant for this residence. Open the door, Miss Blackwell. Lights flickered on upstairs. A moment later, a figure appeared silhouetted against an upstairs window. Judith Blackwell. Her face, visible even from the street, initially registered indignation, annoyance at the disturbance. Then, as her eyes focused on the phalanx of armed federal agents surrounding her property, the uniformed officers, the dark vehicles blocking the street, her expression contorted, shock, disbelief, and then raw, primal fear. She clutched the collar of her expensive silk robe tighter around her neck, her eyes wide, darting frantically. FBI. Open the door now. The lead agent repeated, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. After a tense minute that stretched into an eternity, the heavy front door finally clicked open. Judith Blackwell stood there, framed in the doorway, her usual imperious arrogance completely dissolved, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. Her carefully styled hair was disheveled, her face pale and drawn. Her voice, when she tried to speak, was a choked, inarticulate sound. Judith Blackwell, you are under arrest for violations of federal law, including aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and mail fraud. The lead agent stated formally, stepping forward. She was immediately taken into custody, Mirandized, and gently but firmly handcuffed, her sputtering protests. This is a mistake, a misunderstanding. I demand to speak to my lawyer, were ignored as she was escorted, stumbling slightly, towards a waiting FBI vehicle. Simultaneously, teams of forensic examiners armed with gloves, evidence bags, and specialized equipment began a meticulous, court-authorized search of her home. They fanned out through the large house, their movements practiced and efficient. They seized computers, laptops, tablets, external hard drives, printers, scanners, smartphones. They collected financial records, correspondence, notes, anything potentially related to the fabrication scheme. In her pristine home office, they found exactly what they expected: sophisticated printers capable of high-resolution output, boxes of high-quality, heavy-gauge paper stock matching the counterfeit documents, digital templates for court documents stored on a thumb drive carelessly left on the desk, encrypted communication logs on her main computer detailing her methods, her contacts with illicit service providers, and potentially implicating others or identifying more victims of her schemes. The evidence locker would be full. Judith Blackwell's arrest. The perp walk from her luxurious home to the waiting federal vehicle was captured in stark detail by the assembled news crews. Clad in her silk robe, her face a mask of shock and disbelief, flanked by impassive FBI agents. The image was instantly transmitted. By mid-morning, it was national news. Headlines screamed from news websites and cable news chyrons. FBI raids HOA Karen's mansion in dawn sweep. Prominent community leader arrested in shocking forgery plot. FBI director's veteran father target of elaborate HOA revenge scheme. The story exploded, resonating deeply across the country. It tapped into a potent undercurrent of public anger over the perceived abuses of power by homeowner associations, outrage at the mistreatment of veterans, and growing anxiety about the insidious, destructive nature of identity theft and digital fraud. Veterans groups issued furious statements demanding swift justice and condemning the attack on Sergeant Major Ramirez. Politicians, sensing the public mood, called for investigations into HOA practices nationwide and demanded stronger legal protections against elder abuse, identity theft, and malicious prosecution through fabricated evidence. The Oak Ridge Hills HOA and Judith Blackwell herself became instant symbols of unchecked privilege, petty tyranny, and profound injustice. Elena Ramirez watched the initial news reports break on the large monitor in her office. She maintained her professional distance, as mandated by her recusal, observing the coverage as she would any major federal operation unfolding in her region. But beneath the calm exterior, a profound, deeply personal sense of relief washed over her. Relief for her father, vindication for his honor, gratitude for the swift, decisive action of her colleagues. The system, the complex machinery of justice she had dedicated her life to serving, was working. It operated impartially, protecting the innocent and holding the guilty accountable, even when the victim was her own family, and even when she had to step aside to ensure its untainted integrity. She allowed herself a small, private smile. Then she turned back to the other demanding cases on her desk, her focus returning, sharp and clear. The legal case against Judith Blackwell proceeded with remarkable speed, propelled by the mountain of incontrovertible evidence the FBI task force had amassed. The digital forensics were damning. The financial trail was undeniable. The testimony from the cowed HOA board members was consistent and corroborated the fraudulent scheme. Evidence of her researching other potential victims added weight to the prosecution's portrayal of her as a calculated, serial manipulator, not someone who made a one-time mistake. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, the prospect of a lengthy, humiliating public trial, and the certainty of decades in federal prison if convicted on all counts, Judith Blackwell's expensive legal team eventually advised her to seek a deal. After tense negotiations, she accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts, aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and mail fraud. In exchange for her plea, prosecutors agreed to drop some of the lesser potential charges and recommend a sentence at the lower end of the federal sentencing guidelines, though still substantial. Her sentencing hearing was a media event. The federal courtroom was packed with reporters, concerned Oak Ridge Hills residents, members of veterans advocacy groups, and curious onlookers. Daniel Ramirez sat in the front row, erect and dignified in a simple suit. He was flanked by Elena, attending in a purely personal capacity, her FBI credentials left behind, and Martha Jenkins, who held his arm supportively, Several other neighbors sat behind them, a quiet phalanx of solidarity. Judith Blackwell, dressed in a severe gray suit, looked diminished, stripped of her usual arrogance. She avoided eye contact, staring fixedly at the defense table. Daniel chose not to speak directly, but he submitted a victim impact statement. The assistant U.S. attorney read it aloud, her voice clear and steady, echoing in the hushed courtroom. The statement detailed, in Daniel's own quiet, powerful words, the profound emotional distress the ordeal had caused him, the sleepless nights, the public humiliation, the corrosive fear and anxiety, the violation of his sanctuary, his home. The way Judith's malicious actions had sought to undermine his sense of security and stain his honor after a lifetime dedicated to service and integrity. He spoke of the damage done not just to him, but to the community's trust. When the prosecutor finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Then, the federal judge, a stern, no-nonsense former prosecutor known for her sharp intellect and intolerance for abuse of power, addressed the defendant. She peered over her reading glasses at Judith Blackwell. "Miss Blackwell," the judge began, her voice low but carrying immense authority. "Please rise." Judith stood, trembling slightly. "I have reviewed the evidence in this case, the pre-sentencing report, the victim impact statement, and the arguments of counsel." The judge continued, "The picture painted is one of calculated cruelty, breathtaking arrogance, and a profound betrayal of trust. You wielded your position of privilege, wealth, and influence within your community, not to build it up, but to inflict pain and destruction upon an honorable man. You targeted a decorated veteran, Sergeant Major Daniel Ramirez, a man who served this country with distinction for 30 years. The judge's gaze hardened. Your motive was not, as you initially claimed, community safety. Your motive was personal malice, petty revenge, and an appalling, pathological need for control. You sought to destroy his reputation, steal his home, and render him destitute through sophisticated criminal acts of deception and fabrication. The complexity and meticulousness of your forgery scheme reveal a chilling level of premeditation and a profound disregard for the laws of this nation and the basic tenets of human decency. You didn't just tell a lie, Miss Blackwell. You constructed an entire false reality designed to incite fear and hatred. Your crimes strike at the very heart of social trust. Trust in our neighbors. Trust in community associations. Trust in the integrity of official documents. And trust in the sanctity of personal identity. The damage you inflicted extends far beyond your immediate victim. The judge paused, letting her words hang in the air. This court must send an unequivocal message that such behavior will not be tolerated. That wealth and status provide no shield against accountability for criminal conduct. That weaponizing lies to destroy another human being carries a heavy price. Therefore, pursuant to the sentencing guidelines and considering the aggravating factors, the vulnerability of the victim, the elaborate nature and scope of the fraudulent scheme, the abuse of a position of trust, and the critical need for significant deterrence, this court sentences you, Judith Blackwell, to a term of imprisonment of 7 years in federal prison. A gasp went through the courtroom. 7 years. A significant sentence for white-collar crime, reflecting the judge's assessment of the severity and malice involved. The judge continued, outlining the further consequences. You are ordered to pay substantial restitution to Mr. Daniel Ramirez for the damages incurred, the amount to be determined in a subsequent hearing. Furthermore, given the evidence suggesting the scope of your fraudulent activities and the likelihood that illicit funds were used to acquire or maintain assets, significant portions of your personal wealth, including potential civil forfeiture proceedings against your home in Oak Ridge Hills and other assets, will be targeted to satisfy the financial penalties, fines, and restitution orders associated with this conviction. And it goes without saying, Miss Blackwell, you are hereby permanently barred from ever serving in any capacity, board member, officer, volunteer, employee, related to any homeowners association or similar community governance body, anywhere in the United States. Judith Blackwell swayed slightly, her face ashen. The sentence. The restitution, the potential loss of her home, the permanent ban, the totality of her downfall crashed down upon her. U.S. Marshals moved discreetly closer in Oak Ridge Hills. The fallout from Judith Blackwell's arrest and conviction was immense, like a localized earthquake that reshaped the social landscape. Daniel Ramirez was completely, publicly vindicated. His honor was restored, his name cleared beyond any shadow of doubt. He was embraced by a community deeply ashamed of its near complicity in Judith's scheme, embarrassed by how easily they had been manipulated by fear and forged documents. Apologies were offered. Casseroles were delivered. Invitations were extended. The HOA board was completely overhauled. The remaining members resigned under pressure, replaced in a special election by residents committed to transparency, fairness, and actual community building, rather than punitive enforcement and property value obsession. New bylaws were drafted and implemented, specifically designed to prevent such abuses of power, ensure due process for residents facing complaints, and require rigorous verification of any potentially damaging information before action could be taken. Compassion was explicitly written into the mission statement. The story of Judith Blackwell and Daniel Ramirez served as a stark, cautionary tale reverberating far beyond the manicured hedges of Oak Ridge Hills. It became a case study, discussed in legal seminars, community association journals, and news articles nationwide, highlighting the potential for unchecked power within HOAs and the terrifying vulnerability of individuals, especially seniors, to sophisticated identity fraud and malicious reputational attacks in the digital age. Daniel Ramirez continued to live in his modest bungalow, the house his daughter Elena had grown up in, the house filled with memories of Martha. He continued his early morning walks. Though perhaps with a slightly lighter step, he continued to meticulously tend his roses, their vibrant blooms a testament to resilience and enduring beauty. His quiet dignity remained intact, unbowed. The ordeal had undoubtedly left scars, a wariness, a lingering sense of violation, but the outpouring of genuine support from his neighbors, the swift and decisive action of the justice system, and the finality of Judith Blackwell's downfall allowed him to slowly reclaim his hard-won peace. Elena Ramirez continued her demanding work at the FBI, leading her teams in the ongoing fight against complex fraud, public corruption, and threats to national security. The fight against deception and the protection of the vulnerable had always been her mission, but now it was imbued with an even deeper, more personal resonance. She understood, more profoundly than ever, the devastating human cost when trust is betrayed and lies are weaponized. Judith Blackwell began her lengthy sentence in a federal correctional facility, stripped of her wealth, her status, her carefully curated image, and her freedom. Her expensive beige house in Oak Ridge Hills was eventually seized and sold through civil forfeiture to help satisfy the hefty restitution and fines levied against her. She became a stark testament to the inescapable truth that no amount of privilege, cunning, or malice can ultimately shield deliberate cruelty from the long, unwavering reach of justice. The manicured lawns of Oak Ridge Hills still looked much the same. The hedges remained precisely trimmed, the facades uniformly painted. But beneath the placid surface of suburban order, something had fundamentally, irrevocably changed. The illusion of perfect harmony had been shattered, revealing the potential for darkness lurking beneath the veneer of conformity. The true cost of unchecked power, petty tyranny, and blind adherence to arbitrary rules had been laid bare for all to see. And the enduring value of quiet honor, resilience, community support, and simple human decency had been powerfully, unforgettably reaffirmed. The roses in Daniel Ramirez's garden seemed to bloom a little brighter that year,